You're really gonna arrest the governor's son on camera? Say the word, Judge. I'll make your career trend in 10 minutes.
Do you know who my father is? He runs this state. You're just a glorified clerk in a bathrobe. You know, folks, I've been sitting on this bench for nearly 3 decades, 30 years. That's longer than the young man standing before me has been breathing air on this earth. I've seen hardened criminals show remorse. I've seen gang members show respect for the process. I've seen people who have lost everything maintain their dignity. But every once in a while, and thank God it is rare, someone walks through those double doors who believes that the rules of gravity simply don't apply to them. Someone who thinks that biology, physics, and the penal code are just suggestions for the common people, inconvenient obstacles that can be removed with a phone call or a last name. Today is one of those days. And frankly, the level of delusion we are witnessing in this courtroom isn't just disrespectful, it is dangerous. Let me introduce you to the defendant. His name is Julian Alexander Thorne. He is 19 years old. According to the intake paperwork sitting right here in front of me, and I had to read this twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating, his occupation is listed as influencer and heir, not student, not employee. Heir. His address is listed as the governor's mansion. That's right, the official state residence. Now, I look at young Mr. Thorne standing there. He's wearing a blazer that probably costs more than my first car. He's checking his manicure. He's rolling his eyes. He's sighing loudly enough for the court reporter to flinch. He hasn't looked me in the eye once since he swaggered in here 20 minutes late. I see a young man who has lived his entire life in a bubble of yes. Yes, you can have that car. Yes, we'll make that grade disappear. Yes, we'll call the dean. He has never heard the word no in a way that actually stuck. He looks at this courtroom, this sacred ground where we try to uphold the fragile concept of justice, and he doesn't see authority. He sees an inconvenience. He sees a waiting room before his father's lawyers come to clear the clutter. But here is what Mr. Thorne is failing to grasp. In this room, there are no governors. There are no senators. There are no dynasties. There is only the law. And right now, the law has some very serious questions for him. Let's be clear about why we are here. This isn't a parking ticket. This isn't a noise complaint. If it were, Mr. Thorne would have just paid the fine online with one of his platinum credit cards, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. No. What brings us here is an incident that occurred last Friday night. An incident that could have ended in tragedy. An incident that displays a level of recklessness so profound it borders on malice. I'm looking at the police report filed by Officer Sarah Jenkins, badge number 589, a 10-year veteran of the force, a mother of 3, a woman who puts on a uniform every day to protect this community. And what she encountered on Route 9 wasn't just a traffic violation, it was a weapon, a 5,000-pound weapon moving at speeds that turned steel into shrapnel. According to the radar log, Mr. Thorne was clocked doing 115 miles per hour in a construction zone. Let me repeat that for the people in the back who might think this is just kids being kids. 115 miles per hour in a zone marked 45, where men and women were working on the road at night. Workers in reflective vests. Fathers, brothers, sons. People trying to earn a living, repairing our infrastructure. And Mr. Thorne decided that his need for speed, his need for a rush, or maybe just his boredom, was more important than their lives. But the speed. The speed is just the beginning of this story. It's what happened after the blue lights turned on that turns my stomach. It's what happened when Officer Jenkins approached the vehicle that makes this case a defining moment for this court. Because usually, when you get pulled over doing triple digits in a work zone, you're terrified, you're shaking, you're praying you don't go to jail. But not Julian Thorne. Oh no. According to the dashcam footage, which we will review when those lights flashed, he didn't pull over immediately. He didn't slow down to safety. He turned up his music. He turned up the volume. He didn't panic. He didn't check his speedometer. He decided that the police officer behind him, the one risking her life to navigate a construction zone at high speed, was simply background noise, a nuisance, like a fly buzzing around his head while he was trying to enjoy his playlist. Officer Jenkins had to engage her siren. She had to use the PA system. And even then, it took nearly 2 miles for Mr. Thorne to pull over. 2 miles of uncertainty. 2 miles where Officer Jenkins didn't know if she was dealing with a drunk driver, a fleeing felon, or something worse. In law enforcement, time is survival, and Julian Thorne stole 2 miles of her time just because he could. When he finally stopped, he didn't pull onto the shoulder. He stopped right in the active lane of travel, forcing traffic to divert around them, creating yet another hazard. Officer Jenkins approached the vehicle. Her hand was near her holster, not because she wanted to use force, but because that is the training. You never know what is waiting for you behind tinted glass. And the glass on that luxury SUV was dark. Illegal tint, by the way, which we will address later. Officer Jenkins tapped on the window. Once, twice, nothing. She could see the glow of a cell phone screen inside. She could see the silhouette of Mr. Thorne, not reaching for his registration, not keeping his hands on the wheel, but holding his phone up. He was recording. He was live streaming. He was turning a traffic stop into content for his followers. Finally, the window rolled down. Not all the way, just a crack, maybe 3 inches. Just enough to let the air conditioning out and the arrogance in. Officer Jenkins, professional as always, leaned in. She introduced herself. She stated the reason for the stop. Sir, I clocked you at 115 inches, a 45 zone. I need your license and registration. And what was Mr. Thorne's response? Did he apologize? Did he fumble for his wallet? Did he say, "I'm sorry, officer, I didn't realize"? No, he didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes glued to his phone screen, checking his angles, making sure the lighting was right for his audience. Without turning his head, he said, "You're interrupting me. I'm in the middle of a broadcast." Officer Jenkins repeated the order. Sir, put the phone down and provide your license and registration. Now, that's when he turned. That's when the mask slipped. He looked at Officer Jenkins with a mixture of pity and disgust. He looked at her uniform, her badge, the patrol car lights flashing in his rearview mirror, and he laughed. A short, sharp laugh. License? He asked, as if the word was in a foreign language. You want to see my license? Honey, you don't need my license. You need to check your GPS. You need to check the license plate you just ran. Because if you had done your job, you would know that stopping this car is a career-ending move. Officer Jenkins didn't flinch. She stood her ground. License and registration. Last warning. And that is when Julian Thorne dropped the hammer. That is when he decided to play the only card he has ever held in his deck. He leaned toward the window, looked Officer Jenkins dead in the eye, and delivered the line that he thought would make her tremble. The line he thought would make the lights go off and the ticket disappear. My father is the governor, he spat out. He runs this state. He signs your paycheck. And if you don't get back in your little car and drive away right now, I will make one phone call. Just one. And by tomorrow morning, you won't be an officer. You'll be a security guard at the mall. Do you understand me? I own you. He actually said that. I own you. To a sworn officer of the law. He equated public service with servitude. He equated authority with ownership. In that moment, he wasn't just a speeding teenager. He was a tyrant in training. He believed, truly believed, that his genetic lottery ticket gave him the right to threaten the livelihood of a woman doing her job. Officer Jenkins took a breath. She looked at this boy, this child in a man's suit, threatening to destroy her career because he didn't want to be inconvenienced. And she made a choice. She didn't walk away. She didn't apologize. She reached for her radio. But Mr. Thorne wasn't done. Seeing that his threat hadn't worked instantly, seeing that Officer Jenkins wasn't cowering in fear, he escalated. He unlocked his phone again. Fine, he said. You want to play it the hard way? Let's get Dad on the line. Let's see how brave you are when the governor asks for your badge number personally. He started dialing. He held the phone up to the window, speakerphone on, daring her to stop him, daring her to arrest the governor's son. He was smiling. He thought he had won. He thought this was the moment where the rules bent around him. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that on the side of the road, at midnight, with 115 miles per hour on the radar, the governor isn't in charge. The law is. And Officer Jenkins was about to give him a crash course in civics that he would never forget. She didn't wait for the call to connect. She didn't wait to hear the governor's voice on the other end of the line. She realized in that split second that allowing Julian Thorne to dictate the timeline of this stop was dangerous. It gave him control. And on the side of a highway, control belongs to the officer, not the suspect. Officer Jenkins opened the driver's door. The sudden intrusion into his climate-controlled bubble seemed to shock Mr. Thorne more than the flashing lights had. He dropped the phone. It clattered onto the center console, the call still connecting, the dial tone echoing in the sudden silence of the cabin. "Step out of the vehicle," she ordered. "Now." Mr. Thorne looked at her, then down at his phone, then back at her. The arrogance briefly flickered into confusion. "You can't touch me," he stammered. "My lawyer, my father." "Step out." When he didn't move, when he grabbed the steering wheel like a defiant toddler refusing to leave a toy store, Officer Jenkins did exactly what she is trained to do. She reached in, took hold of his arm, and guided him out of the car. And that is when the screaming started. He wasn't screaming for help. He wasn't screaming in pain. He was screaming about his wardrobe. "This is Italian silk," he yelled as she turned him against the vehicle. "You're wrinkling the blazer. Do you have any idea how much this costs? Get your hands off me." It is a fascinating psychological study, isn't it? A man is facing charges that could land him in prison, facing the destruction of his reputation, endangering lives, and his primary concern is the integrity of his jacket sleeve. It speaks to a detachment from reality that is almost pathological. Officer Jenkins applied the handcuffs. The click of that metal ratcheting shut is a sound that usually sobers people up. It is the sound of freedom ending. It is the sound of the state taking physical control of your body. But for Julian Thorne, it was just another insult. "You're dead," he hissed as she checked the fit of the cuffs. "Career over. Pension gone. I hope you enjoyed being a cop, Sarah, because tomorrow you're going to be begging for a job, scrubbing toilets." He used her first name. He read it off her nameplate and used it to demean her. He tried to strip away her authority by making it personal. But Officer Jenkins didn't engage. She didn't argue. She didn't explain that his father's position doesn't grant immunity to his children. She simply recited his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent." "I don't need to remain silent," he shouted over her. "I have a voice. I have millions of followers. You're the one who needs to stay silent when my legal team gets here. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Use it," he challenged. "Use it all. No judge in this state will touch me. They all work for my dad. You're just too stupid to realize who you're messing with." She placed him in the back of her patrol unit. Now, if you've never been in the back of a police interceptor, let me paint a picture for you. It isn't a luxury SUV. There is no leather. There is no heated seating. It is hard, molded plastic, designed to be easily cleaned. It smells of industrial disinfectant, and quite often, the fear of the people who sat there before you. For Julian Thorne, accustomed to the finest upholstery money can buy, this must have been a shock to the system. He kicked the door. He spat at the partition. He demanded water. He demanded a supervisor. He demanded that Officer Jenkins unlock his phone so he could finish his live stream. Officer Jenkins ignored it all. She radioed for a tow truck for the SUV, which, I might add, was impounded immediately due to the extreme speed and reckless nature of the offense, and she began the transport to the precinct. The ride to the station is usually a time for reflection. It's when the adrenaline fades and the gravity of the situation settles in. But according to the audio recording from the backseat camera, Mr. Thorne spent the entire 20-minute journey listing the names of people he was going to have fired: the police chief, the district attorney, the mayor, even the tow truck driver. He truly believed, in the depths of his delusion, that he was the victim here. He believed that he was being persecuted by a jealous, inferior public servant who just wanted to bring a high-value individual down to her level. When they arrived at the precinct, the VIP treatment he expected was noticeably absent. There was no private entrance. There was no concierge. There was just the booking desk, the fingerprint scanner, and the cold, fluorescent reality of the processing center. And when the booking sergeant asked him to remove his belt and shoelaces, standard protocol to prevent self-harm, Mr. Thorne looked at him and asked, "Do you have a valet for these?" He wasn't joking. He expected a claim ticket. He expected service. But the real turning point of that night, the moment where the cracks in his armor began to show, wasn't during the fingerprinting. It wasn't during the mugshot where he tried to smirk like he was on a red carpet. It was when he was given his one phone call. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call a bail bondsman. He dialed the private, direct line of the governor. He stood there, holding the receiver with his cuffed hands, waiting for the voice that would make all the bad men go away, waiting for Daddy to fix it. We have the logs. We know he dialed. And we know what happened next. It rang, and it rang, and it rang. And for the first time that night, Julian Thorne looked scared. Because nobody picked up, the voicemail picked up. You have reached the private line of Governor Thorne. Please leave a message. Julian didn't leave a message. He stared at the phone in disbelief, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly in the cuffs. For the first time in 19 years, the safety net wasn't there to catch him. The invincible shield of his surname had failed. He was placed in a holding cell, a 6x8 concrete box with a stainless steel toilet and a bench that felt like a block of ice. He spent 6 hours in that cell, 6 hours sharing air with a man arrested for bar fighting and another for grand larceny. 6 hours where nobody cared about his shoes, his jacket, or his follower count. You would think, wouldn't you? You would hope that 6 hours in county lockup would be enough to crack that shell of entitlement. You would hope it would be a moment of clarity, a rock bottom that forces a young man to reevaluate his choices. But entitlement is a stubborn disease. It doesn't cure easily. At 7 a.m., the cavalry finally arrived, not the governor. Oh no, the governor doesn't come down to the precinct. He sent Mr. Marcus Sterling, the family's senior legal counsel, a man whose hourly rate could fund a public school for a month. Mr. Sterling walked in, filed the paperwork, posted the exorbitant bail without blinking, and escorted Julian out the side door to avoid the press. And this is where the tragedy of character truly reveals itself, because Julian Thorne walked out of that jailhouse, blinked in the morning sun, took a deep breath of free air, and decided that he hadn't just survived a brush with the law, he decided he had defeated it. He didn't go home and hide in shame. He didn't apologize to his father for the embarrassment. He got into the back of the waiting limousine, pulled out a backup phone provided by his lawyer, and he went live. Again, we have the video. It was submitted into evidence this morning. It was recorded less than 20 minutes after his release. In the video, Julian is leaning back in the leather seat of the limo, sipping a sparkling water, looking into the camera with that same smug grin we saw earlier. They tried to break me, he says to his audience. The jealous cops, the haters in uniform, they tried to lock the prince away. But you can't cage a lion. I'm out. I'm free. And to Officer Jenkins, nice try, sweetheart, but my dad runs this town. You're just renting space in it. He captioned the video. Untouchable. Number. Royalty. Number. Free Julian. He mocked the officer who spared his life. He mocked the system that treated him with far more fairness than he deserved. And he publicly doubled down on the very threat that got him arrested in the first place. He wanted the world to know that the rules didn't apply to him. He wanted his followers to validate his delusion that he was above the consequences. And that brings us back to this moment, to this courtroom, to the arraignment that happened 10 minutes ago, where Mr. Thorne stood up, interrupted the proceedings, and called me a clerk in a bathrobe. He insults me not because he hates me personally, but because I represent the one thing he cannot buy. I represent a boundary. And men like Julian Thorne hate boundaries. They see them as insults to their existence. When he told me I was too poor to judge him, he wasn't talking about my bank account. He was talking about power. In his mind, money is the only currency of authority. If you don't have millions, you don't matter. If you don't have a mansion, your voice is noise. But I have news for Mr. Thorne. I have news for his lawyer, Mr. Sterling, who is currently looking at his shoes because he knows deep down that his client has dug a hole so deep that no amount of money can fill it. The news is this: the governor isn't here, the cameras aren't live streaming, the fans aren't commenting. It is just you, me, and the penal code of this state. And in this room, the currency isn't dollars, it's accountability. Mr. Thorne, you entered a plea of not guilty through your attorney, That is your right. But bail is a privilege. Bail is based on the assurance that the defendant will return to court and, crucially, that the defendant does not pose a danger to the community. You drove 115 miles per hour, you threatened an officer, and then, while out on bail, you publicly threatened her again on social media, inciting your followers against a public servant. You have demonstrated, with crystal clarity, that you have zero respect for the law and zero intention of following it. So, Mr. Sterling, you can put your checkbook away. You won't be needing it today. Mr. Sterling, you can close that briefcase. Because today, the price of admission isn't cash, it's freedom. Based on the defendant's clear lack of remorse, his continued threats against a witness on a public platform, and the demonstrated fact that he views our laws as optional suggestions, I am revoking bail. Mr. Thorne is remanded to the custody of the Sheriff's Department immediately. He will remain incarcerated until his trial concludes. For a moment, the air left the room. It was sucked out by the sheer shock of the statement. Julian Thorne didn't move. He didn't blink. He stood there, his mouth slightly open, processing words that were structurally impossible in his version of the universe. Remanded, custody, immediately. Mr. Sterling, however, reacted exactly as I expected. He shot up from his chair like he had been electrocuted. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is outrageous. My client is the son of the sitting governor. He is a public figure. Placing him in general population is a security risk. We are prepared to offer house arrest, full GPS monitoring, surrender of passport. I held up a hand, just one hand, and Mr. Sterling stopped mid-sentence. House arrest? I asked, keeping my voice low and even. You want me to confine him to the governor's mansion? To a 10,000 square foot estate with a heated pool, a private chef, a home theater, and a gaming room? Mr. Sterling, that is not confinement. That is a staycation. And frankly, your client has treated this entire legal process like a vacation long enough. As for the security risk, I continued, leaning forward, the sheriff runs a very tight ship. I assure you, Mr. Thorne will be perfectly safe. He will have his own cell. He will have 3 meals a day. They won't be prepared by a Michelin star chef, but they will be nutritious. And he will have exactly the same protection as the man who stole a loaf of bread to feed his family. No more, no less. But, Your Honor, the ruling stands. Counselor, sit down. Mr. Sterling sat. He slumped, actually. He knew the game was over. He knew he had to make the phone call he had been dreading, the one to the governor, explaining that his son wasn't coming home for dinner. But Julian wasn't done. The shock had worn off, replaced by a panicked, feral rage. The realization that he was about to be touched, handled, and caged by people he considered the help broke him. You can't do this, he screamed, his voice cracking, losing that smooth influencer polish. Do you know what my dad will do to you? He'll ruin you. He'll bury you. You're nobody. You're a peasant in a robe. The bailiffs moved in. 2 of them, big men who have heard every threat in the book and are impressed by none of them. They reached for Julian's arms. Don't touch me, Julian shrieked, recoiling. Get away from me. I'm Julian Thorne. I'm worth millions. You're all dirt. You're all poor, pathetic dirt. Hold on, I said. The bailiffs paused. They looked at me. Julian looked at me, his chest heaving, sweat beading on his forehead, ruining his perfect makeup. Before you escort Mr. Thorne to his new accommodations, I said, I want to address something. I want to address the comment you made earlier, and the one you just repeated, that I am a peasant, that I am too poor to judge you. I took off my glasses. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see that there was no anger there, only pity. Let's analyze that statement, Julian. Let's really look at it. You measure worth in assets. You measure value in the price tag of a suit, the horsepower of a car, the square footage of a house. By those metrics, you are absolutely right. My net worth is a rounding error compared to your family trust. But let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see a young man who has consumed more resources in 19 years than most families earn in 10 lifetimes. You eat the finest food, wear the finest clothes, travel to the finest places. And yet, what have you produced? Nothing. You build nothing. You create nothing. You help no one. You contribute zero to the society that feeds you. You are a consumer, Mr. Thorne, a black hole of resources. You take, and you take, and you take, and you think that ability to take makes you a king. It doesn't. It makes you a parasite. Julian flinched. The word hit him harder than a gavel. You called Officer Jenkins a nobody, I continued. Officer Jenkins, who risks her life every night to keep drunk drivers and reckless children like you from killing innocent people. She builds safety, the construction workers you almost vaporized on the highway. They build the roads you drive on. The teachers in this city build mines. The nurses build health. They are rich, Julian. They are wealthy in contribution. They are wealthy in purpose. They go home at night tired, yes, but they go home knowing they matter. You have 1 million followers, but not one friend who will tell you the truth. You have a mansion, but no home. You have a name, but no identity outside of your father's shadow. So, when you stand there and call me poor, I don't feel insulted. I feel sad for you. Because you are the poorest man in this room. You are bankrupt of character. You are destitute of integrity. And unlike money, you can't inherit those things. You have to earn them, and you have never earned a single thing in your life. Julian stared at me. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The script he had lived by, the script where money wins, where the rich are superior, where the poor are invisible, had just been shredded. He looked around the courtroom, looking for an ally, looking for a camera, looking for anything to validate his delusion. He saw only the stony faces of the bailiffs and the defeated slump of his lawyer. Take him away, I said quietly. The bailiffs moved. This time, Julian didn't fight. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He let them turn him around. He let them pull his arms behind his back. The second click of handcuffs that day echoed through the silent courtroom. But this time, it wasn't a temporary inconvenience. It was a reality. As they marched him toward the side door, the door that leads not to a limo, but to the holding cells and the tunnel to the county jail, Julian looked back over his shoulder. He looked at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. The influencer mask had melted away. In its place was just a terrified 19-year-old boy realizing that he was about to walk into a world where his father's name was just words on a piece of paper. Marcus, he whispered to his lawyer, call my dad, please. Mr. Sterling didn't look up. He just closed his briefcase. The door slammed shut, and Julian Alexander Thorne disappeared. Not because of a magic trick, not because of a phone call, but because the law, for once, worked exactly as it was designed to. But if you think the story ends there, if you think the governor took this lying down, you are very much mistaken. Because the next morning, my phone rang. My private line rang, not the office line, not the clerk's desk, but the direct line that sits on the corner of my mahogany desk in Chambers. Only a handful of people have that number. My wife, the chief of police, and the district attorney. And apparently, Governor Thorne, I looked at the caller ID, State House. It was 7:15 inches the morning. I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee. I let it ring twice. I wanted to compose myself. I wanted to make sure that when I answered, my voice was as steady as the foundation of this courthouse. This is Judge Boyd. Judge Boyd, good morning. This is Richard Thorne. His voice wasn't like his son's. It wasn't shrill. It wasn't frantic. It was smooth. It was the voice of a man who shakes hands for a living. A baritone practiced in boardrooms and televised debates. It was the voice of a man who is used to charming people before he destroys them. Governor, I said, to what do I owe the pleasure? Please, call me Richard. We're both public servants here, aren't we? Men of the people. I didn't respond. I let the silence hang there. It is an old negotiation tactic. The first person to fill the silence usually loses. He cleared his throat. I'm calling about the unfortunate situation with my son, Julian. I understand he was in your courtroom yesterday. He was, I said, and he is currently in the county jail. Yes, well, that's what I wanted to discuss, the governor said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more confidential. Look, Judge, we both know Julian is a handful. He's spirited, he's young, he makes mistakes. But jail, general population, for a traffic violation, it seems excessive, don't you think? He was doing 115 inches a work zone, Governor. He threatened an officer, and then he incited harassment against that officer while out on bail. I don't find the revocation of bail excessive. I find it necessary. I appreciate your perspective, the governor countered smoothly. But we have to look at the bigger picture. Julian is a public figure. His safety is paramount. And frankly, this whole spectacle is becoming a distraction for the state. I have important legislation on the table. I can't have the media circus camped out at the jail. Then perhaps you should have taught your son not to speed, I said. There was a pause. A cold, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The charm was evaporating. The velvet glove was coming off. Judge Boyd, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Let's not be naive. You have a re-election coming up next year, don't you? The Judiciary Committee, they pay very close attention to judges who show poor judgment, judges who let personal vendettas interfere with the administration of justice. There it was, the threat. It wasn't I make one call and you disappear. It was smarter, it was cleaner, it was political. He was threatening my career, my reputation, my pension, but he phrased it as concern. Are you threatening me, Governor? I'm simply offering you a lifeline, he said. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to review the bail hearing. You are going to find that, upon reflection, house arrest is sufficient. Julian will go home today. The media will lose interest. And when your re-election comes up, well, the party remembers its friends. I looked at the phone receiver. I looked at the picture of my family on my desk. And then I looked at the framed copy of the Constitution on the wall. Governor, I said, I think you have mistaken me for someone who wants a career in politics. I am a judge. My job is not to make friends. My job is to interpret the law, and the law says your son is a danger to the community. You are making a mistake, he whispered. A very expensive mistake. Is that all? Governor, you're done, he snapped. You hear me? You're done. The line went dead. I put the phone down. My hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I knew what I had just done. I had just declared war on the most powerful man in the state. I knew the retaliation would be swift. I expected smear campaigns. I expected audits. I expected the press to suddenly turn against me. But I didn't expect what happened 10 minutes later. My clerk, Sarah, burst into my chambers. She didn't knock. Her face was pale. Judge, she said, breathless, you need to see the news. Right now, she grabbed the remote and turned on the television in the corner of my office. It was the local news channel, breaking news. The headline scrolled across the bottom of the screen in urgent yellow letters. Judge accused of bias, defense attorney files motion to recuse Judge Boyd over personal vendetta. And there, on the screen, was Marcus Sterling, Julian's lawyer, standing on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by microphones. We have evidence, Sterling was saying to the cameras, looking grave and serious, that Judge Boyd has a history of animosity toward the governor's family. This ruling yesterday wasn't justice. It was a political hit job. We are filing an emergency motion with the state Supreme Court to have Judge Boyd removed from this case immediately and to have Julian Thorne released pending a fair hearing. I watched in silence. They were fast. I had to give them that. They had this narrative ready to go before the governor even hung up the phone. They were going to paint me as the villain. They were going to make it look like I was the one abusing power. What do we do? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. The phone lines are already lighting up. Reporters are calling. The governor's office issued a statement saying they are deeply concerned about judicial overreach. I stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. I saw the cars moving below. I saw the people walking to work. The people who don't have governors for fathers. The people who get tickets and pay them. The people who follow the rules. We do nothing, I said. Sarah looked at me like I was crazy. Nothing? Judge, they are destroying your reputation. They are going to get him out. No, I said, turning back to her. We let them talk. We let them file their motions. We let them spin their lies. because there is one thing Mr. Sterling and the governor forgot about. What's that? The courtroom is recorded, I said. Every word, every gesture, every interruption, and more importantly, I didn't hang up the phone immediately when the governor called. Sarah looked confused. I recorded the call. I lied. Well, not technically a lie. In this state, judicial chambers are considered public offices for the purpose of security monitoring. My phone line, specifically the direct line, is automatically logged for quality assurance and security purposes. It's a system we installed 3 years ago after a bomb threat. Most people forget it exists. I'm willing to bet the governor did too. Sarah, I said, get the IT director on the line. I want the audio log from 7:15 a.m. this morning. And then call the district attorney. You're going to release the tape? She whispered, eyes wide. No, I smiled. I'm going to enter it into evidence. If they want to make this about judicial misconduct, let's have a hearing. Let's play the tape in open court. Let's let the voters decide who is really abusing their power. But before I could make the call, before I could set the trap that would bring the governor down, my door opened again. It wasn't my clerk this time. It was two men in suits, dark suits, earpieces. They didn't look like local police. They didn't look like state troopers. One of them flashed a badge. It wasn't a badge I saw very often. Judge Boyd? He asked. I'm Special Agent Miller with the FBI. We need you to step away from your desk. We're taking jurisdiction of the Thorne case. I froze. The FBI? On what grounds? I asked. Corruption, Agent Miller said. But not yours, Judge. He walked over to the television, where Marcus Sterling was still ranting about my bias. He turned the volume up, and that is why we demand Julian's release, Sterling shouted. Agent Miller looked at me. We've been wiretapping the governor for 6 months, a RICO investigation involving construction contracts. But that phone call he made to you this morning, that was the final piece of the puzzle. That was obstruction of justice. Federal obstruction. My jaw dropped. The governor thought he was bullying a local judge. He didn't know he was walking into a federal trap. We need you to play along, Judge, Miller said. We need you to hold that hearing. We need you to let the governor think he's winning. Because when he steps into this courthouse to testify for his son, we're going to arrest him. In my courtroom? I asked. Miller smiled. A cold, predatory smile that matched my own. In your courtroom, on live stream, in front of the whole world. I sat back in my chair. The game had just changed. It wasn't just about a speeding ticket anymore. It was about taking down the entire administration. Agent Miller, I said, reaching for my gavel, tell me what you need me to do. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Just as the governor had predicted, it was a media circus. But what he didn't know was that he wasn't the ringmaster of this show. He was the clown. The cameras were lined up along the back wall, red lights blinking, broadcasting live to the entire state. Reporters were jostling for position, and in the front row, looking like a Roman emperor surveying his Colosseum, sat Governor Richard Thorne. He looked impeccable. Midnight blue suit, crisp white shirt, a flag pin on his lapel. He was holding his wife's hand, playing the role of the concerned, grieving father to perfection. Every time a camera pointed his way, he managed to look both strong and victimized at the same time. It was a masterclass in political theater. His son, Julian, sat at the defense table. He looked better than he had yesterday. He had shaved. His hair was styled. Clearly, someone had gotten access to him in the holding cell. He looked at me with a smirk that said, "My dad is here. You're dead." Marcus Sterling, the lawyer who had accused me of bias on the morning news, stood up. He adjusted his tie, looked at the cameras, and then looked at me with a mixture of disdain and triumph. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming for the benefit of the microphones. "We are here on an emergency motion to recuse. The defense asserts that this court has demonstrated a clear, personal, and vindictive bias against the defendant and his family. We have sworn affidavits stating that you have made disparaging remarks about the governor's policies in private. We believe you are using young Julian as a pawn to settle a political score. It was all lies, fabricated nonsense designed to muddy the water. But I had to play my part. I had to look defensive. I had to look like a man trying to save his career. Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice tight. Those are serious accusations. Do you have evidence? I have the testimony of the governor himself, Sterling announced theatrically. I call Governor Richard Thorne to the stand. A murmur went through the crowd. This was unprecedented. A sitting governor testifying in a bail hearing for a reckless driving case? It was overkill. It was a show of force. He wanted to walk up there, look me in the eye, and dare me to do something about it. Governor Thorne stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who owns the building. He placed his hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I watched him. I watched the man who had threatened me on the phone less than 4 hours ago swear an oath to God and the state. And I didn't say a word. Governor, Sterling asked, has Judge Boyd ever expressed animosity toward you? Unfortunately, yes, the governor lied smoothly. We've had disagreements. I believe he resents my stance on judicial reform. I believe he is taking that out on my son. It breaks my heart to see the justice system weaponized against a 19-year-old boy. And did you, Sterling continued, at any point try to influence this court improperly? The governor chuckled, a soft, incredulous sound. Absolutely not. I respect the separation of powers. I would never dream of interfering with a judicial proceeding. I simply want a fair trial for my son. That is all any father wants. I looked toward the back of the room. By the exit doors, leaning against the wall, was Special Agent Miller. He was wearing a generic gray suit, blending in with the press. He caught my eye. He gave the slightest nod. It was time. Cross-examination? I asked the prosecutor. The prosecutor, who had been briefed by the FBI just 10 minutes before court started, stood up. He looked nervous. He knew he was about to end a political career. No questions, Your Honor. But the court has a few. I turned my chair to face the governor directly. Governor Thorne, I said, you just testified under oath that you would never interfere with a judicial proceeding. Is that correct? That is correct, Judge. And you testified that you did not contact this court improperly? I did not. So, I said, picking up a piece of paper from my desk, a transcript of the call log provided by IT. You did not call my private chambers at 7:15 a.m. this morning. The governor froze, just for a microsecond. His eyes darted to his lawyer. Sterling looked confused. This wasn't in the script. I may have called to inquire about the schedule, the governor stammered. Administrative matters, I repeated. Did you or did you not tell me that if I did not release your son, my career was done? Did you or did you not offer a quid pro quo involving my re-election support? That is preposterous, the governor shouted, his face turning red. I never said that. That is a lie. This is exactly the bias I am talking about. You are under oath, Governor, I reminded him. Perjury is a felony. Are you denying the content of that call? I deny it categorically, he roared, slamming his hand on the railing. It never happened. You are making this up. I looked at Agent Miller again. He pushed off the wall. He tapped his earpiece. Suddenly, the side doors of the courtroom burst open. 6 agents and FBI windbreakers marched in. The room erupted. Cameras flashed wildly. Reporters were shouting. Julian Thorne jumped up from his seat. What is this? The governor screamed, standing up. Order. I demand order. Sit down, Governor. I slammed my gavel. The sound cracked like a gunshot through the noise. This court is not adjourned, but your administration is. Agent Miller walked right up to the witness stand. He didn't look intimidated. He looked bored. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Richard Thorne, Miller said, his voice cutting through the chaos. You are under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and tampering with a federal witness. Witness? The governor sputtered. What witness? Miller pointed at me. Judge Boyd is a federal witness in the RICO case against you, and you just threatened him on a recorded line, and then you lied about it under oath. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. The governor looked at me. The color drained from his face. He looked at his son, who was watching in horror. He looked at his wife, who was sobbing in the front row. And then he looked at the cameras. He realized, in that moment, that everything he had built, Every favor he had traded, every threat he had made, it was all over. He didn't fight. He slumped. He let them cuff him. As they marched the governor out of the courtroom past the stunned press corps, I looked down at the defense table. Julian Thorne was sitting alone. His lawyer was frantically making calls. His father was in handcuffs. His safety net was gone. I cleared my throat. The room went silent. "Mr. Thorne," I said. Julian looked up. He looked small. He looked like a child. "It seems your father is unavailable to take your call," I said. "So, let's finish our business. Bail remains revoked. You will be transported to the county jail. And since your primary counsel, Mr. Sterling, appears to be a co-conspirator in your father's obstruction case based on his press conference this morning, I am appointing you a public defender." A public defender," Julian whispered. "Yes," I said, "a free lawyer. For people who can't afford one. Or for people whose assets have just been frozen by the federal government. Take him away." People ask me why I stayed on the bench for 30 years. Why I put up with the threats, the long hours, the low pay compared to private practice. They ask me if I was afraid when the cartel heir threatened me. They ask me if I was afraid when the governor threatened to end my career. And I tell them the truth. I wasn't afraid. I was angry. I was angry for Officer Jenkins, who was treated like a servant. I was angry for the construction workers who almost died on that highway. I was angry for every person in this state who follows the rules and gets crushed by people who think they are the exceptions. Julian Thorne thought he was untouchable. His father thought he was the law. But they forgot the one thing that holds this whole fragile society together. They forgot that in a courtroom, the only thing that matters is the truth. Julian is currently serving 5 years in a state penitentiary. He works in the laundry. He makes 12 cents an hour. I hear he hates the uniforms. The governor is serving 20 years in federal prison. And me? I'm still here. The dust settled quickly. It always does. The media vans packed up and left. The protesters put down their signs. The governor's mansion was emptied, sterilized, and prepared for the next occupant. But in the quiet that followed the storm, the real work of justice began to show its fruit. A week after the verdict, I received a letter. It wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't from a politician. It was handwritten on plain, lined paper. It was from Officer Sarah Jenkins. She wrote, "Judge Boyd, for 10 years, I have put on my badge wondering if it mattered. I have watched people with money buy their way out of consequences, while the people I swore to protect got left behind. When Julian Thorne threatened me on that highway, I was ready to quit. I thought the system was broken. I thought nobody had my back. But when I saw you stand up to the governor, when I saw you choose the truth over your career, you gave me something I haven't had in a long time. You gave me hope. I'm not quitting. I'm studying for the sergeant's exam. Thank you for holding the line." That letter, that is why we do this. You see, the case of Julian Thorne and his father wasn't just about speeding. It wasn't just about corruption. It was a test, a stress test for our civilization. There is a pervasive lie in our culture today, a lie that is whispered in boardrooms, shouted on social media, and flaunted in VIP sections. The lie is that some people are better than others. The lie is that if you have enough followers, enough zeros in your bank account, or the right last name, human decency is optional for you. Julian believed that lie. He was raised on it. He thought that because he lived in a mansion, he was a giant, and everyone else, the police, the workers, the judge, were ants. But here is the brutal truth that Julian learned in that 6x8 cell. The law is the great equalizer. When you strip away the designer suits, the limousines, and the titles, we are all just fragile, flawed human beings responsible for our own actions. To the other Julians out there watching this, and I know you are, the ones who treat service workers like furniture, the ones who think road safety laws are for peasants, the ones who scream, "Do you know who I am?" when things don't go your way. Let this be your notice. We see you. We are tired of you. And the days of looking the other way are over. You might have a Carlos on speed dial. You might have a governor for a father. You might have a black card. But sooner or later, you will walk into a courtroom like mine. You will meet an officer like Sarah Jenkins. and you will find out that your currency has no value here. Justice is not a vending machine. You don't put money in and get the verdict you want. Justice is a shield for the weak and a sword against the tyrant. It is fragile. It requires courage to maintain. It required Officer Jenkins to stand her ground on a dark highway. It required the FBI to investigate a sitting governor. And yes, it required a clerk in a bathrobe to say no. Julian Thorne wanted to disappear. He wanted to make the officer disappear. Instead, he made his own future disappear. Don't make the same mistake. Respect the law, respect each other, and remember, no one is too rich to be judged. This court is adjourned.